So let's start with the magnitude of the problem. Your paper paints a very dire picture of where we are and where we're going to go if we don't address this issue. Spell it out.
Huge, immense, amazing that we would get in this position. Now, let me make a distinction here. The actual solution is not only fairly straightforward, but I think everybody understands it. You need more revenues, you need less spending, and you especially need less spending in our medical programs. And I think everybody knows that. But trying to get the compromise is just hopeless. So if we don't do something by, say, the middle of the 2020s, we'll be paying over $1 trillion a year in interest. It's just one indicator. Eventually, we would pay more in interest than we pay for the rest of the federal budget around 2080. So the problem is just immense, and there's no way to avoid it if we don't adopt new policies. That we have to have new policies.
And why, in the absence of a change in policy, does this situation arise?
Because Congress has made commitments that it can't keep. Now, there are things that would be hard to plan. So it passed Medicare, for example, which is the biggest problem. Medicare is the biggest problem in the sense that if you compare the revenues that we have to pay for Medicare, even under current arrangements, and 100% of revenues are not just from Medicare, there's some from general revenues. But if you compare our current funding arrangements with what is expected in the future, they're not even close. They're not even on the same continent. And there would have been no way to predict that, I don't think, because the cost of medical care has skyrocketed. And it's both because of what we normally think of as inflation, but it's also because of huge improvements in quality. I mean, think of what medicine in the United States can do now. That's why people live to, we have a lot of people living to be in their 90s. And it's because, they get a new heart, new knees, new everything. And it's just, the advances in medical science are huge. So it would have been hard to predict that. But mostly it's because we put things in the law and we made commitments and promises, especially for Medicare and Social Security, that were not adequately financed. And regardless of what the explanation is, we know now, and we've known for several years. Brookings started writing books about this 8 years ago, saying this is coming, and we have to do something. And the political system has responded some. We've reduced the deficit by around $2 trillion in the last year through actions by the Congress, which is quite an enormous achievement, but that's less than a third of how far we need to go. And most importantly, we haven't done anything serious about Medicare. So the Congress has not created a problem that was not completely predictable, but then when they saw what the problem was, they didn't address it.
And how much, if you imagine restored economic growth at a healthy level, right, how much of the problem is intractable, absent policy change, and how much of it kind of takes care of itself?
Very little takes care of itself. The problem with Medicare is just enormous. Eventually Social Security, that's further out, but eventually Social Security would have an enormous problem as well. When those two programs begin to take more money from general revenues, that really signals difficulty. And we're squeezing the rest of the government already. There are a lot of people, even Democrats, who feel we've squeezed defense too much already. In fact, part of the problem we're going to have before this Congress adjourns, probably after the election, so November, December, is going to be what we do about the sequester, which is automatic cut. That's what it means, automatic cut in defense, which, as I say, a lot of Republicans and more than a few Democrats feel are really a problem, and we probably shouldn't make those cuts. And under current law, that means we have to cut something else.
So let's talk about the president's record in this area. Everybody talks about fiscal discipline as something that they care about, as a value that they are going to represent. The president certainly criticized the deficits in the last administration. He came in with big deficits. They're no smaller now. What is this a creature of, as he presents it, of he's tried to work in this space and been stymied by Republicans, or is this a matter of his own failures, or both?
Well, it's both. It's both, for sure. I'm a Republican, but I'm kind of an Obama fan. I like a lot of things he's done. I'm studying some of his social policies right now, which I think in the long run are going to be immensely important. He's trying really to make evidence the heart of program funding, and we've needed that for a long time if he actually does it. He certainly is basing new programs on evidence. When he begins to do that with old programs and begin to end programs, that will be a revolution, because people here don't like to end programs, they just like start new ones. That's part of the reason we're in the situation we're in. But I think there have been many opportunities where the president could have seized the moment, and with real leadership, I think we would be much further ahead than we are now. And I would say to you that previous presidents at moments not quite this bad, or not this bad, but in serious moments, for example, the Social Security funding crisis in 1983, and Reagan and Rostenkowski and others on the Hill cooperated across party lines. And I think they were quite brave. Boy, you know, it's a rule of American politics that Social Security is the third rail, and they both increased taxes and cut benefits. And so it's been done before. Obama's had a number of chances. Every single annual presidential budget is an occasion in which he could start something big. Other presidents have done that in other ways, but that is one thing that he's missed. The second thing that I think was really important was probably the most important missed opportunity was the Bowles-Simpson Commission and their recommendation, which I think is pretty much where we're going to wind up. And it's both increased revenues and it's cuts in spending, and it addresses Medicare in a very wise way. So I think it hits all the important buttons. And as I say, the final solution, I think, will be something like that. So that was an occasion, and it was his commission. He appointed the commission. I mean, Republicans had a big say in their members, but he decided to have a commission. And yet, he, you know, treated it like a old tire. He almost ignored it. And that was a real opportunity. And another big opportunity was a negotiation this past summer with the Speaker of the House, John Boehner. And it appears, I mean, I wasn't there, obviously, but if you read all the media accounts, and I have talked to some people who were involved, they hit it off. They trusted each other, and above all, their staffs appeared to trust each other. Not every single member, but there was a lot of trust among the staffs. And anybody who's been involved in big congressional negotiations knows staff is really crucial. And if they trust each other, that really helps. So they were it was looking really good there for a while. And the hang-up got to be that Boehner was under the impression that he would agree to $800 billion in revenue increases, which was a breakthrough, and it was a huge, risky thing for him. In fact, I don't think he could have gotten it through the House if he'd committed to it, but he did commit to it. And then the president raised the bar to he wanted $400 billion more, for understandable reasons. Now, I'm not condemning the president for that, but I think that was the number one thing that broke up the negotiations. So that was another real chance. And then another one that I really regret was when Representative Ryan, who has posed several budgets that could not pass both houses of Congress, don't get me wrong, I think he's very brave, very wise, done all kinds of good things, but still politically would not pass because there are no new revenues in it. And you can't solve this problem without new revenues in the long term. You just can't do it. But nonetheless, Ryan has been shown tremendous leadership and tremendous risk-taking, especially for his proposals on Medicare. Well, he had a proposal on Medicare that almost nobody liked. Republicans stuck with him. And then he reached a compromise with a Democratic senator, Ron Wyden, and they put their proposal out late last year, and the White House, the day it came out, condemned it. And I think, I mean, Henry Aaron and others who know more about health care than I do think this is premium support's not a good idea. We can talk about that if you want to, but I do think the final solution is going to be something along the lines of premium support. So you would think at least the president would encourage him and say nice things and so forth, even if he's not going to support it. But, you know, the politics is such that if the Democrats appear to support any serious changes in Medicare, they feel that they're going to lose, and they're planning to use Medicare, as it's called, in the 2012 elections, and many already doing it. They already have commercials. They show grandma going off a cliff in a wheelchair and so forth. So the president's missed many opportunities.
And what about the Republicans? I mean, how do you assess the Republican critique of the administration on this? It does seem like the Republicans have the president at least notionally accepts the idea that you put forth as the solution, that you need more revenues and less spending. The Republicans do not accept the basic premise.
Right.
Is that a political pose that masks actually a different underlying bargaining position, as Boehner's conduct suggests, or is it, do you think, a matter of intractable ideological commitment?
Yeah, this is religion, pure and simple. Republicans for many, many years, I think it really goes back to Republicans decided they couldn't control spending, not just the Democrats' spending, but their own. I mean, don't forget, Republicans created, we fought 2 wars that weren't financed, that's at least $3 trillion. They created an expansion of Medicare to cover drug benefits, that's at least $50 billion a year and increasing. So Republicans have played a role in the increase in spending. So, you know, if you want to be a little bit humorous about it, you'd say they couldn't control themselves either, so they decided the solution was reduce the revenues, control the revenues. So for many years, the no new taxes pledge has been ground zero in the Republican Party. It's a huge part of the Republican agenda, and it has worked many times electorally. It puts the Democrats in a very difficult position. Republicans say they always want more money, they're going to put their hand in your pocket and so forth. So it's good electoral politics for the Republicans. It's not opposed, I do not think. Still, it's wrong. They're going to have to change. They must change. We cannot solve this problem without new revenues. And equally important, in the way the political world works, you can't get to a bargain without both sides giving something. And that's the biggest thing the Republicans have to give. And I think eventually they will. There have been several cracks in the dike. Senator Coburn, who is very, very conservative. Honestly, when I found out that he agreed to increase taxes as part of the Simpson-Bowles deal, I could not believe it. I had to make calls and say, no, I can't believe he did it. So that shows you, and there are other Republicans who have said publicly they would do something. And once the ball got rolling, I think there would be, the dike would break, and there would be a lot of support for increased revenue.
And where do you assess Romney as being here? I mean, obviously he's in the middle of a presidential campaign.
Right.
There are things you cannot say as a Republican presidential candidate.
Especially Romney.
Right. But so then there's the candidate Romney, and then the anticipated President Romney.
Right.
You know, you compare this to religion. How religious do you expect him to be?
Yeah. The last Republican president who saw the light and did something serious about taxes was Bush the Elder. And there are many analysts who feel that it cost him the election. He lost because Republicans were so mad. I was in the House on
but
staff.
We had a balanced budget within a few years.
Absolutely. I mean, I think it was wise policy. I was in the House of Representatives working for staff of the Ways and Means Committee then, and I'm telling you, the outrage among Republican members was sincere and serious. I mean, they really were outraged. So Romney would face that and maybe more because it's become such an issue. And in addition, Romney is not completely trusted by the right and the so-called base of the Republican Party. So it would take enormous, enormous courage on his part to propose that. It would be good for the future of the country if he could pass it. So we'll see what happens. I don't think that he has done things to this point that encourage me to think that he would do that. And if he doesn't, and he wins, then we're going to have to wait at least 4 years. We can continue to chip away and make progress, but we can't really solve the heart of the problem until we have new revenues.
So if you're, irrespective of who the next president is, what's the platonic ideal policy for the administration to pursue in the balance of revenues and spending cuts in Medicare? What does it look like?
Right. Okay, first of all, I don't think we have to achieve complete balance. I would put a caveat in here that I personally would accept, given the spending history of Congress, I would accept a constitutional amendment that the U.S. Congress, like many of the states, would have to balance the books each year or maybe every 2 years. I don't know exactly how to formulate it, but that is maybe going too far. We don't need to do that. The National Academies did a very thorough report with the greatest budget experts in the country. And they came to the conclusion that if we had a debt of 60% of GDP, which that would be on the order of $10 billion this year, and it would increase. That's another nice feature. You could have more debt every year and still not exceed 60% of GDP. And incidentally, historically, there have been very good studies of the history of finances of nations since the 16th century. And they would say 60% is pretty safe too, if you don't exceed 60%. So if we got to 60%, that's what we need to do, especially if we can control Medicare spending. Now, we have 10,000 people retiring every day in the United States. Social Security and Medicare are our two biggest, other than defense, our two biggest spending items, and they're going to grow like mad in the future. So we have to do something to control both those programs as well. So we have to have reforms of Medicare and reforms of Social Security, probably that increase revenue, but that also actually have cuts in spending. Now, this doesn't mean that we're actually, most Americans, if you say cut, they think we're spending $1,000 now, we're going to spend $980 or $950 or something. No, because we have projected increases into the future. A cut in Washington means we're not going to increase spending as much. The rate of spending increase will be more controlled. That's what we're looking for. And that's what we have to have in Medicare and in Social Security, and then we have to have new revenues. That's the heart of what we need to do.
And as a tactical matter for the next administration, things come to a head actually before the next administration comes into office. We have the sequester going into effect this fall, right?
Big parts of it right after the first of the year.
After the first of the year. And then we have the Bush tax cuts expiring also at the first of the year.
Right.
Cumulatively having a huge economic impact, but also a very salutary, presumably budgetary impact.
Right.
So the new administration comes in, and the old administration, maybe the same administration, goes out with this sudden shock that will presumably precipitate some sort of congressional action. Does this create a real opportunity? Does it? Will Congress just sort of push the ball down the road? I mean, how do, if you're the incoming president at that moment, how do you handle that possibility?
Right. It does create an opportunity. And as I've already outlined, there have been many opportunities in the past. There are moments when things were looking pretty good. Maybe we could make some really serious progress. We did make some progress, but not enough. And I think the same, roughly speaking, this time, what has usually happened in the past will happen again. The expression everybody uses in Washington, which I was pleased to see you didn't use, was kick the can down the road. And I think that's what they'll do. They'll extend the Bush tax cuts maybe for 6 months. We could even have a debt ceiling issue then. All of these things, I don't think they'll really get to the heart of any of them. Certainly not in a lame duck Congress. It seems very unlikely. And they'll wait until the new year, but they'll have to do something, as you point out, because of this enormous, people are now calling it a cliff, where all these provisions hit. One other point, though, that's interesting, and that is if Congress did nothing, which it often likes to do, the problem would not be quite solved, but boy, it would go a long ways. Why? Because the Bush tax cuts are worth at least $3.7 trillion over 10 years, and if they all expire, then that would be up $3.7 trillion against the deficit over 10 years. I figure we need 4.5 or 5, maybe 6 at the most. So that's really serious. Yeah, very serious progress. Now the downside, as you point out, is the impact on the economy. It's interesting that CBO, though, when they score this, they would score it would have an impact on the economy. We'd probably lose more jobs and so forth, and everybody's extremely nervous about that. But in the long run, 10 years later, 20 years later, 30 years later, the effects are good.
It's very interesting. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.